Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you kindly for coming by. I do appreciate it. I'd like to thank the chairman of Kenya Commercial Bank for the time today. Very interesting discussion, actually. Ex-NASA scientist and has a very interesting approach and an interesting analysis around the banking sector. I'd like to thank His Excellency the Swedish Ambassador for lunch and an always erudite discussion covering Ukraine. The Swedes, of course, are invested in that part of the world, MH370, and even the situation here on the ground. Of course, I wrote that piece of Matters UK and the scramble for Crimea. I was talking about the fact that London is booming, and I think the city, and by extension the United Kingdom, is a little like Dubai. Both cities have become safe havens in an uncertain world. I said of Putin and Crimea, I said it would be simply unconscionable for Putin to lose Crimea. It would represent the castration of Russia as a geopolitical player. And for a time I was saying, look, it's a fait accompli regarding Crimea. The question is, how does he deal with eastern Ukraine? I think he consolidates his gains in Crimea, but he keeps those guys on tenterhooks. I took this photograph the morning I landed in London on Saturday morning. I think it was around 7 or 7:15 a.m. as I crossed Putney Bridge of the River Thames. So I'm going to put that up, and I'll put that photograph I took of Dubai from the sky. And I go back to this comment talking about yesterday's cosmology discovery. It said everything we see today, look out there when I say this, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, was imprinted at that very moment. Isn't that amazing? In a tiny little pinhead equivalent. You cannot call the same thing black today and white tomorrow, he declared to stormy applause, saying Western partners had crossed the line over Ukraine and behaved irresponsibly. Don't believe those who try to frighten you with Russia and you scream that other regions will follow after Crimea, Putin said. We do not want a partition of Ukraine. We do not need this. And that was the trigger, I think, for a bit of a rally, but I've been saying Russia was just so ridiculously cheap. Setting out Moscow's view of the events that led to the overthrow of Yanukovych in a popular uprising last month, Putin said the so-called authorities in Kiev had stolen power in a coup and opened the way for extremists who would stop at nothing. Making clear Russia's concern at the possibility of the US-led NATO military alliance expanding into Ukraine, he declared, I do not want to be welcomed in Sevastopol by NATO sailors. And that was the red line, essentially. He accused the United States on Monday of being guided in its foreign policy not by international law, but by the rule of the gun. Our Western partners, headed by the United States, prefer not to be guided by international law in their practical policies, but by the rule of the gun, he told a joint session of Parliament. They have come to believe in their exceptionalism and their sense of being the chosen ones, that they can decide the destinies of the world, that it is only them who can be right. And he signed this decree that's recognized Crimea as an independent state. Everything is related to Russian history. Crimea is a fortress and where the Russian Black Sea fleet is in port. Spoke about the rehabilitation of ethnic Tatars. Talk about what he considers to be the lamentable collapse of the Soviet Union. We all used to belong to the same country, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The events happened in such a fast way that many of the countries didn't realize. When Crimea ended up in a different state, Russia realized that not only Russia was robbed, but Russia was robbed in broad daylight. Crimea is a Russian land. They used Crimea as a cow they milked, and they didn't understand the realities on the ground. Crimea's sanctions unacceptable, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov tells John Kerry. The important point to note is Russia in fact punched first and hard with an apparent liquidation of $100 billion of US Treasury securities. Lagvov is saying the Crimea Republic residents made their democratic choice in line with the international law and the United Nations Charter, which Russia accepts and respects. A foreign ministry statement said, while the sanctions introduced by the United States and the European Union are unacceptable and will not remain without consequences, Kerry reiterated Washington's position that the referendum and the takeover of Crimea were illegal and unacceptable. We don't accept them, and there will continue to be costs and consequences. We are continuing to prepare additional sanctions, and we haven't taken options off the table. Kerry told students at the State Department that an incursion by Russia into eastern Ukraine would be as egregious as any step I can think of that can be taken by a country in today's world, particularly by a country like Russia where so much is at stake. As I said, I think he's going to consolidate, but he's going to keep them on tenterhooks. Now, I hope we don't get there. He likened the Crimea crisis to the lead-up to World War II. Today is egregious enough when you raise this nationalistic fervor which could, in fact, infect in ways that could be very, very dangerous, he said. All you have to do is go back and read in history of the lead-up to World War II and the passions that were released with that kind of nationalistic fervor. He referred to the Soviet Union's meddling in Czechoslovakia and Poland. There's a tough history of things like Czechoslovakia in 1968, where the alleged rationale for going into the country was to protect the people in it. You can ask the Poles how they felt being protected for all those years. Pankaj Mishra makes the following point, that Putin's aggressive foray into Eurasia and the possibility of a new Cold War with the West has actually enhanced rather than lessened his popularity in Russia. And then Chisudovsky has an interesting point regarding the signing of the March 18th treaty. It makes the previous agreement null and void. Sevastopol, including the Russian naval base, become part of an autonomous region within the Russian Federation. Crimea's territorial waters now belong to the Russian Federation, and he's by saying by extension it's a much bigger piece of the pie. I came across an interesting report on the Wall Street Journal saying that Iran has even more natural gas than Russia. And that's something to consider, because if the pressure continues to build and heat up, Iran will find, I think, that it has a geopolitical role to play, which it might not have had just recently. We thought it would be the United States that would lead the campaign against Iran, said Yaalon, who pointed to the Ukraine crisis as an example of Washington showing weakness. My conclusions on that point are that President Barack Obama is not weak, he is subtle, very 21st century, and deploys a sophisticated template which includes cyber currency and color-coded revolutions of all kinds. In Ukraine, the color-coded revolution overreached itself and met with a formidable adversary. Putin is not Gaddafi or Ben Ali or Bashar Assad, who were tin gods when you compare them to Putin in the geopolitical spectrum, as it were. Israel bombed Syrian posts over a Golan attack on its troops, attacked several Syrian military sites on Wednesday in retaliation for a roadside bombing that wounded 4 of its troops on the occupied Golan Heights on Tuesday. Very interesting article in Asia Times saying from Kiev to Beijing and Taipei. A certain amount of attention, and rightly so, has been paid to the discomfiture of the People's Republic of China with Crimea unilaterally declaring independence from Ukraine. The PRC abstained on the UN Security Council condemnation of the vote, instead of supporting Russia with a nay. The PRC possesses or covets several significant territories on whose inhabitants, if given the opportunity, might eagerly defy the One China policy to announce, organize, and pass a referendum of independence. Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Inner Mongolia, Macau, and Taiwan. Very interesting piece, well worth reading. I was following the tweets from the Africa CEO Forum. I like this tweet: women are the backbone of the economy in Africa, I would say, and the world. Bob Collymore says the private sector in Africa is responsible for 90% of the employment, 75% of the output, and 60% of the investment. Ramesh Muchikals of Olam says 32 of the $36 billion produced in Africa are exported today. And then finally, returning to this extremely perplexing story about the plane, I like this Reuters report: whoever reached across the dimly lit cockpit of a Malaysian Airlines jet and clicked off a transponder to make flight MH370 vanish from controllers' radars flew the plane into a navigational and technical black hole. By choosing that exact place and time to vanish into radar darkness with 238 others on board, the person presumed to be a pilot or a passenger with advanced knowledge appears to have acted only after meticulous planning, according to aviation experts. Understanding the sequence that led to the unprecedented plane hunt widening across two vast tracts of territory north and south of the equator is key to grasping the motives of what Malaysian authorities suspect was hijacking or sabotage. By signing off from Malaysian airspace at 1:19 a.m. on March 8 with the casual "all right, good night" rather than the crisp radio drill advocated in pilot training, a person now believed to be the co-pilot gave no hint of anything unusual. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the transponder, a device identifying jets to ground controllers, was turned off in a move that experts say could reveal a careful sequence. Every action taken by the person who was piloting the aircraft appears to be a deliberate one. It is almost like a pilot's checklist, said one senior captain from a nation carrier with experience of jets, including the Boeing 777. The radio call does not prove it was the co-pilot who turned off the transponder. Pilots say the usual practice is that the pilot, not in control of the plane, talks on the radio. Whoever turned the transponder to off did so at a vulnerable point between two airspace sectors when Malaysian and Vietnamese controllers could easily assume the airplane was each other's responsibility. See again. The predictable effect was to delay the raising of the alarm by either party. Turning off the transponder indicates this person was highly trained, said Weber of consultancy TechOp International. It was a red-eye flight. Most people, the passengers and the crew, just want to rest. If someone had taken control of the aircraft, they would not have noticed anything. And it is extremely interesting analysis, and clearly it remains a mystery. Pilots say whoever was in control may have kept the radio on in silent mode to hear what was going on around him, but would have avoided restarting the transponder at all costs. That would immediately make the aircraft visible like a bright light. Your registration, height, altitude, and speed would all become visible. After casting off its identity, the aircraft set investigators a puzzle that has yet to be solved. It veered either northwards or southwards within an hour's flying time of arcs stretching from the Caspian to the southern Indian Ocean. And then, so basically, I think whoever did this must have had lots of aircraft knowledge, would have deliberately planned this, had nerves of steel to be confident enough to get through primary radar without being detected, and had been confident enough to control an aircraft full of people. It's really a mystery, and I think the explanation is going to confound us all. I read this report saying the NSA surveillance program reaches into the past to retrieve, replay phone calls. And then I thought to myself, and they cannot find the Malaysian airline. I like this graphic of the day, which is a brief history of innovation. Interesting article by William Dalrymple regarding Afghanistan as China forges new alliances, a new great game has begun. And then finally, a supermassive black hole, 6 billion light years from Earth, is spinning extremely rapidly. It's a photograph I found on Chandra, which I liked. Coming to international markets, the euro 139.22, dollar index 79.43. Let's see if it gets a Yellen-led bounce later on today, but I doubt it. Japanese yen 101.56, the Swissy 0.8740, the pound 165.92, so below 166. Aussie 0.9121, India rupee 61.139, the South Korean won 1071.55, Rial 233.22, the Egyptian pound 696.14, which has been there for quite a while, and the rand at 1073.56. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, last at 79.43. No momentum in it for now. And while some think that there are buyers out there for the dollar right now, I think Yellen's going to have to say something interesting to get people interested. Dollar yen firm 101.56. It was a great buy above 103, as I said. I like this photograph of Singapore. Third place Singapore, in the same vein as the metabolists and brutalists Golden Mile complex, formerly known as Wo Hup complex, is a metabolist-inspired building in Singapore built in 1973. The photograph won one of the Sony Awards. Coming to commodity markets, gold 1354.65, very expensive at these levels over a 4 to 8 week basis still. Crude oil $98.47. I think equilibrium price is somewhere around 90. Iraq is pumping big, as I said, and there's more Iranian oil on the market than ever before. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, the World Bank's lead financial sector specialist Arnaud Dornel told a conference that annual infrastructure needs across Africa are estimated at $93 billion, 15% of Africa's GDP. I like this. Eurobonds have become like stock exchanges, private jets, and presidential palaces. Every African leader wants to have one. African states lining up to join the growing club of dollar bond issuers. Economists and analysts warn of a slide back into indebtedness that could undo recent gains and create a Eurobond curse to match the distorting resource curse. Talking about Ghana becoming the first African beneficiary of debt relief to tap international capital markets in 2007. Talking about Rwanda, Zambia, Nigeria, Senegal, all tapping them subsequently. Talking about the debt remission program, which came under the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Talking about Zambia being a slow motion version of Ghana, where it sold a very oversubscribed Eurobond, but now people are worried about the underlying dynamics. And this is the soft underbelly of Africa's renaissance, which is the recurrent expenditure component of most budgets. Ghana, you remember, raised salaries in anticipation of a windfall, and now they're spending way beyond their means. And I think Zambia is a similar crisis, and the copper price will continue to go low, in my opinion. South African oil shares up 2.41% in 2014. Dollar rand 1073.45. We've been here for a little while. A South African anti-corruption watchdog unveils a report on Wednesday on a $21 million state-funded security upgrade to President Jacob Zuma's private home that a newspaper says included a swimming pool and cattle enclosure. We'll have to see how that pans out, whether its bite is as loud as its bark. Put up a photograph of President Zuma taken by Henry Leutweiler. Egyptian pound steady as you like at 696.12. The Egyptian stock market up 21.69% and at a fresh 60-month high. In 2014, the Nigerian oil shares at a 5-month low. It's down 9.51%. The drip of negative news coming out of Nigeria is not helping. Ghana's stock exchange up 11.53% in 2014, but a considerable amount of that has been eroded by a weak cedi. Zambia's kwacha fell a 4th day yesterday, is the world's worst performer after Ukraine's currency. Dollar shortage persists in Zambia. Local demand for the dollar, net dollar outflows from emerging markets, and negative fundamentals such as weakening copper prices continue to weigh heavily on the Zambian currency. I expect it to remain on the back foot. It's down 11% so far this year. The DRC is issuing a very bullish GDP call, saying a sharp increase in mining production will drive economic growth in the DRC to around 9.5% this year, one of the highest rates in Africa, the Prime Minister Augustine Matata Ponyo said. They're also going to debut 3-month bonds as they seek to reduce dollar dependence in the economy. Of course, the famous story about the DRC is that there are more dollar notes in circulation in the DRC than they are in the US. Somali Islamist militants drove a car bomb at a hotel in a town in central Somalia that was being used by the African Union and Somali military forces, a resident in the militant group said. Hussein Noor, a resident in Bulo Bade town, said a car bomb exploded late on Monday at the Camelo Hotel, and this was followed by fighting between troops and militants that lasted several hours. He was speaking on Tuesday morning, but his line was cut before he could provide further details. Amisom could not immediately be reached for comment. First, a mujahid with a car bomb entered the hotel, followed by two well-armed fighters who sprayed bullets at Sheikh Abdi Aziz Abu Musab, the Al-Shabaab's military spokesman. Joyce Banda saying, "My government will not tolerate such acts of political violence to destabilize the peaceful management of elections and to threaten the peace and security of our people," she said. Violence erupted on Sunday in Malawi shortly after an election rally led by President Joyce Banda at Goliati village in a stronghold of her rival Peter Mutharika of the former ruling Democratic Progressive Party. A police officer was axed to death and a protester was shot dead in clashes with stone-throwing opposition activists after police fired tear gas to disperse the hostile crowd. So things are getting hot there as well. Co-op Bank have reported their full year results, but unfortunately I've been out and about, so I'll look at that overnight. But I've linked it up on Rich Wrap-Ups. Click on the link, scroll down if you really need to see those results. The market's responding very positively. It's up about over 5 or 6%. Carbacid reported first half results where profit after tax declined 11% and earnings per share declined 40.645%. The company said in its commentary the exceptional demand experienced last year in the Southern Africa market for carbon dioxide has eased. Softer than I for one expected. It's probably a little richly priced right now. Kenya caps borrowing at $1.75 billion before Eurobond sales. Kenya's Treasury capped foreign borrowing that includes the country's first planned Eurobond at $1.75 billion in the fiscal year through June, according to a debt strategy document. The Eurobond will push Kenya's total stock of debt to 53.3% of GDP by June from 51.8% at the end of December, according to the document. And I've been speaking about this for a while now. It's all about a big Wembley Stadium moment. I incline to view the government should sell $2 billion worth, and that this Eurobond will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets. We should see a good rally in interest rates. I wrote that on the 20th of January. We're seeing it now. Kenya shilling has been around the 86.50 level for a while. It remains there. The Nairobi All Shares up 5.13% in 2014. The NSE 20 is up 0.2%. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with this wonderful photograph, which was the winner of the Sony World Photography Awards. It's from July last year. A heart-pounding scene of wildebeest migration repeats itself in Africa, and it's a wonderful photograph, which I hope you like. The stock market looks a lot firmer today, on balance, and I think we've churned around a long time. We're overdue a sharp rally. The NSE 20 needs to pop its head through 5,000 and get going again. For now, we remain below that level until we cross 5,000. I continue to see a lot of rotation, but the bias seems to be going higher now, and particularly as we approach Safaricom's results. I think that's going to push through to new all-time highs as well. Kenya Airways from an oversold position is recovering now. KCB, big rally since the release of the full year results. Compare that to equities' reaction since the release. That's come down a bit. But overall, I think the stock market is well placed. Once again, thank you for stopping by.